As a child, I felt burdened by a strange middle name. We all knew there were sergeants in the Army, but what was this S-A-R-G-E-N-T sergeant that I was saddled with? There were in my family a few stories about Daniel Sargent, for whom I was named, but I have to say that probably none of them had any factual basis at all. By the time I was a grown-up and in divinity school, I knew of at least one famous sergeant, Francis, the governor of the Commonwealth. A cousin, I guessed, at that point. I would claim any sergeant as a cousin then. And then as I grew older, I learned of other sergeants. Charles Sprague Sargent of the Arnold Arboretum, and of course, John Singer Sargent, the artist. But I have to say, it wasn't until I moved back from Buffalo, New York to the North Shore and began to learn about the Sargent House Museum that I began to experience some real joy at knowing about the one sergeant, my cousin, Judith Sargent Murray, my first cousin 5 times removed, to be precise, who is, in my estimation, the jewel in the crown of the Sargent family. In the words of her biographer, Sheila Skemp, more even than Abigail Adams, Judith Sargent Murray was at the center of the post-revolution discussion of the proper role of women in the new republic. The essays which Judith published in the Gleaner were read on both sides of the Atlantic and discussed widely. In Judith's essays, we get just a little picture of some of the issues that were important in this new republic, at least important to her. Her essays on the equality of the sexes and observations on female abilities are as relevant and challenging today as they were when she wrote them 2 centuries ago. Her defense of religious freedom, a battle which she won, may serve to remind us today that all Americans, indeed all people, must have their religious freedom defended. And in her letters to family and friends, which she carefully copied into her letter books, help us to understand a bit better the daily life of a privileged woman here in early Gloucester. So, this afternoon, as Barbara said, we'll share just a small slice of her letters and poetry and essays as we let Judith speak. We will not be introducing the various speakers. They will simply, I hope, come up when it's their turn, and you've got their information about them in your program as well. Thank you.
Her most noted work is called On the Equality of the Sexes. In this essay, Judith advocates women's equality. She lays out her arguments for why women are just as smart as men, but are hampered by ignorance. Much of this essay was written in Judith's writing closet in this house. There are only 4 known remaining writing closets in the United States. This provocative essay was published in 1790 home.
In the 18th century, a visit didn't mean dinner. Visits could last for several weeks or months. In this poem, Judith, who is not at all domestic, expresses her frustration at the constant stream of visitors and the social conventions which took her away from her thinking and her writing. These are her words. Petulant lines complaining of being absorbed in family cares.
During their marriage, Judith and John Stevens adopted 2 of his nieces who were orphans, Mary Plummer and her sister Anna. Judith was determined that both girls receive an excellent education, that they understood their social obligations, and that they were prepared to recognize the role of women in the new country. In excerpts from letter 442, written in October 1785, Judith scolds the teenage Anna for her failure to fulfill those obligations while visiting family.
She was often in debt and without resources. Her first husband, John Stevens, inherited debt from his father. He got involved in privateering during the Revolution and then engaged in several risky ventures at sea. During the winter of 1785-86, Judith and John were holed up in the largest and most elegant house.
Stevens was in so much debt that he fled Gloucester to avoid his creditors. In letter 554, written on May 5th, 1787, to her brother Winthrop, Judith laments the fate of her first husband and reiterates her belief in God's never-ending love and support. After a long and melancholy intermission, it is again given to me to address my brother. How soothing is your language, and how gently have you essayed to
Judith Stevens maintained a 14-year correspondence before they married, much of it during the time Judith was married to John Stevens. Although society frowned on a married woman writing to an unmarried man, Judith hoped they could maintain propriety while continuing their friendship. After Stevens' death, Judith writes to her dearest friend, Mary Turner Sargent, describing the scene in which Murray expresses his love for her. Excerpts from letter 615, April 15th, 1778.
In the 18th century, childbirth was the leading cause of death among women of childbearing age. The odds of a successful pregnancy and delivery at Judith's advanced age were very limited. In this letter, written by the Reverend John Murray to Colonel Paul Dudley Sargent in October, describes the state of affairs surrounding the birth and delivery of their first child, which took place in this house.
Marriage to John Stevens was childless. Shortly after her marriage to the Reverend Murray, Judith, in late 30s, became pregnant. She was overjoyed. This poem, the first of her work, published in the Massachusetts Magazine in January 1790, is about the joy of motherhood and the harsh reality that followed. Lines occasioned by the death of an infant. 'Twas thus I planned my future hours to spend, with my soft hopes maternal joys to blend, but agony.
This poem was published in the Boston Weekly Magazine on November 6, 1802. It was signed with one of Judith's pen names, Honora Martesia. In this poem, Judith recalls her joy and delight at the birth of her daughter, Julia Maria, and the exhaustion typical of an infant's mother. Excerpts from lines
writing closets in the 18th century, but Judith's is one of only 4 known to still exist. Most women use them as places to write letters to their extended families and as a place for respite from children and busy households. Judith wrote a revolution in hers. This poem, written in September 1782, just after she moved into her first house, describes how much she cherished this spot. Lines written in like
She always considered Gloucester to be her home. She expresses that love of place in these excerpts from a poem she wrote in September 1784, as she looked out her bedroom window to Gloucester Harbor and beyond. View from my chamber window upon a morning in the 2nd week of September, 1784. Sun just rising. The morning breaks. The shadows flee away. From yonder east bursts the resplendent day. Wide o'er the sky an azure hue prevails. The fleecy clouds in gay meanders sails. There,
Judith worried about her final fate, where she would be laid to rest and how she would be remembered. She wanted to be buried in Gloucester, the place she always considered home. And she wanted her writing to be well known, well loved, and well received. In the end, Judith Sargent Stevens Murray died on July 6, 1820, in Natchez, Mississippi, where she had gone.
So easy to get through. Just a little bit of housekeeping now before we end. As you know, you can come in the house and take a peek before we open tomorrow for the season. You can enter on either this, there's a door here, or over on the other side. And if you have any trash, I know some people brought some food, which is great. There's some trash cans on either side.
Judith Sargent Stevens Murray wrote letters to families and friends about everyday life, like most upper-class women of the 18th century. But Judith wrote so much more. Her letters outline her views on the American Revolution, ideals of the Enlightenment, universalism, religious freedom, leadership for a new nation, and hundreds of other topics. Never satisfied with what she wrote, she took to copying her letters into her letter books. These letter books were one of the few things she took with her to Natchez, Mississippi, at the end of her life. The letter books were found in the attic of Arlington Plantation.
Judith was always embarrassed by her lack of formal education. The strong feelings and lack of confidence in her this generated continued through her lifetime, influenced her thinking and her advocacy, and was reflected in all of her work. In letter 58, written to her brother Winthrop, she notes that, "But during our first years, although our parents were, as you know, the best of human beings, they yet did homage to the shrine of fashion, custom tyrannies of the strongest minds.
For future generations of girls. Judith was always conscious of her own lack of education and determined that she would work to ensure that future generations of girls would have the access to learning that she did not have." These passages are from The Gleaner, Judith's collection of essays and other works. The trust reposed in parents and preceptors is indeed important. The character of the rising generation.
Enlightenment. These quotes from The Gleaner provide a glimpse into Judith's hopes for women, or the sex, as the American Revolution drew to a close. She assumed that all men created equal included her and others of her sex. Judith's thinking about equality and many other political issues of the day was far ahead of its time. In this brief excerpt, Judith mentions Mary Wollstonecraft, an early English feminist writer, usually considered the first of the 18th century feminist writers. However, Judith's seminal essay on the equality of their advancement. In proportion as nations have progressed in the arts of civilization, the value of the sex hath been understood, their rank in the scale of being ascertained, and their consequence in society acknowledged. When their sphere of action is enlarged, when they become wives and mothers, they will fill with honor the parts allotted them. Acquainted theoretically with the nature of their species and experimentally with themselves, they will not expect to meet in wedlock with those faultless beings who so frequently issue.
And the future role of women in society, government, marriage, and the motherhood in the new nation. The idea of incapably a woman is reconceived in the Enlightenment age, totally unadmissible. And we have concluded that establishing the expediency of meeting them to share the blessing of equality will remove every obstacle to their advancement.
Transition. Following the revolution, the colonies had agreed to bind themselves together in a confederation that would be governed by a set of articles. But it was not until 1787 the Constitution would be ratified as the basis of the government to be known as the United States of America. Judith was politically astute and vocal about how she thought the new government should function. In excerpts from the essay, Sketch of the Present Situation of America.
I'm Silverman, and I'm president of the Sargent House. It's great to have you all here. We want to start by thanking everybody that's participating today, and we'd also like to thank our readers